So the topic today is Buddhism to Christianity and back again, continuing the report on my particular spiritual quest in the hope that it will be of benefit to somebody or other. In 1968, I left the Chinese Zen temple fairly disillusioned with practically everything, which had been my stance during high school as well, so I just reverted to that stance. And during the time in the temple, I several times left the temple unauthorized and would go out into San Francisco and find various interesting things to do for a few days. And there was a connection between the Chinese Zen temple and a Christian group called the Holy Order of Mans. And one of the times that I was on excursion, so to speak, one of the members of the Holy Order of Mans met me on the sidewalk and started talking about a certain Ashok fakir and how marvelous he was, and I should really go see him. So I took that advice to heart and went to see Ashok fakir. He had a Dharma assembly room with pictures of various avatars and saints from all different religions. But he was glad to have a Buddhist in the mix, and in fact went to show a biographical film of Shakyamuni Buddha. So I stayed there several days. They were heavily into music, and I heard some quite good music. And then I went back to the temple, but the seed had been planted. And when I left, I went to see a friend of mine in Half Moon Bay in the San Francisco area, and eventually came back to Seattle. And there I met a couple of sisters from the Holy Order of Mans. And again, there was an interaction. And so they were on my radar. And then it wasn't working for me in Seattle, so I moved to Portland. And I was living on the street in Portland, but I got a job almost right away trimming ivy on a big estate. So in no time I was off the street and had a little room, and proceeded to enjoy my stay in Portland. There was a gathering of the Holy Order of Mans, a public offering. I went to that, and the priestess was very impressive. And she convinced me that I was in twice as much trouble as I thought I was, and that I better join up. And I bought that, and I joined up. This was quite a jump for me. The group in question was into esoteric Christianity. The head of the order, one Father Paul Blyton, was a fallen away Jesuit, a Jesuit who dropped out. And when he dropped out, he went into esoteric circles. So we had Christian Tarot, Christian Kabbalah, Christian astrology, and a Rosicrucian type mass in the morning every morning. It was a lovely school. I learned a huge amount there. The part of the educational structure was based on the Jesuit educational structure, which is pretty substantial. So we were writing papers, and I remember reading 2 verses of the New Testament every day and writing a paper on them. So they kept us plenty busy. We also would go out on what they call patrol, where several of us in clerics, with the white bands and the black suits, would run around the neighborhood looking for people in trouble, and we usually found at least one on a given day. I worked in a kitchen at that point, and turned in my pay, but then I had room and board, so it was a good deal. Towards the end of my career, I had taken novice vows, and one of the things that they do with novices is to keep them in the brother house for 6 months, only going out to go to work or only going out with one of the older brothers. So I did that 6 months almost entirely in the house. Again, there was plenty to do. We were always busy, doing painting or whatever. When the 6 months were up, I walked out into the neighborhood and, of course, felt released and more free. There was a Theosophy center near the Brother House in Portland, and I went over there. Door was open. I went in. Nobody was there, but I saw on the podium one of Manly Hall's big books, which he had done in the 1920s, I believe it was. It was folio size, and it had some marvelous illustrations in them. And they completely blew me away. They were very esoteric. A tree growing out of the crown in the heavens and spreading its branches on the earth below, indicating the descent of the spirit into earth. And similar other pictures that were quite well done. And it affected me so much that I actually, in 73, I think it was, went down to the Philosophical Research Institute, which Manly Hall had founded. And I was able to use the library. And there were marvelous things in that library. It had a lot of rare books in it. And I took to taking a book out of the vault, requesting a book from the vault. They brought it out. It was a handwritten manuscript, book form. And it was called Hebdomas Hebdomadum, which means the 7 of sevens. And it had 7 parts, and most of them were written in different languages. So there was a Latin section, a Greek section, a Syriac section, and so on like that. Beautifully done. Lots of illustrations. So the impulse from the Western esoteric tradition struck me quite substantially while I was there. And I increased my study of Tarot and Kabbalah and got a little further into astrology as well during that time. When I left the Brother House of the Holy Order Man's again, it was unauthorized. And I wasn't intending to come back. I went to Olympia, again stayed in my parents' attic for a while. They wrote me a letter saying, show up at the Brother House in San Francisco. And I wrote back saying, okay, send me a bus ticket. And they sent me back a letter saying, find your own way down here. So I hitchhiked down to San Francisco and went up before the council, and they dissolved my vows. So then I was on the street. And while I was on the street, I encountered a group of people that was following the Kid Guru, Guru Maharaji. And I joined that retinue. Somebody had a bus, and we drove to Denver in that bus. And then later there was a gathering called Soul Rush, where they filled most of a stadium with people from all over the place who had come into Houston for that event. And it was pretty interesting. They, totally outrageous. The guru in question had said that he was the father returned and that his brother was the son. And they were going to transform the world. And meanwhile, the Christians were out on the sidewalk banging their crosses on the sidewalk, saying, Antichrist, Antichrist. And Baba Guanji, the brother, opened a big Bible and looked in it, and he said, they don't even know what Antichrist is. So it went on. Meanwhile, the Hare Krishna people were blocking the entrances because he had said that it's no longer necessary, since he was Krishna returned, to do all of these practices. And they didn't like that at all, because they were about the practices of Krishna. So it was a real circus, and I enjoyed it immensely. But that soon ended, and I had to do further with the Holy Order of Mans. They started a front organization called the Friends, and I joined that. I wasn't obviously cut out to be a priest, though I highly value the priest training I received. And when I was in Denver at the Divine Light Mission, the guru action got a little tiresome after a while, and I reconnected with the Holy Order of Mans. And then it wasn't too long after that that I saw a poster advertising a course that was the entry level for what are called the Crown Mysteries. And I asked one of the priests about that. And he said, well, do you like retail? You know, could you meet a lot of people doing retail? And I said, sure, why not? My father had a little shop, so I was familiar with the process. And so I joined and went to that workshop, and they inducted me. And that began training in the Melchizedek Order. The Holy Order of Mans called themselves the arm of Melchizedek. And this was the actual Melchizedek Order, which they were connected to. And it was started by a very excellent teacher who called himself Asriana. Asriana was the Grand Master. His name was the North Astarian. So it was all very flamboyant. And what they had us doing was going out every day with a bucket full of flowers and very finely tooled leather, and offering those for donations. So it was retail all right, but there was no counter. We were going door to door in businesses selling these flowers, and the secretaries always liked to buy flowers and put them on their desk. And different people bought flowers for different reasons. It was pretty interesting. But my temperament was such that I was not a very good salesman. I was number low on the totem pole. And after 6 months, it got to be a little bit much going out every day and peddling flowers and leather. So I left that group as well. Again, unauthorized. I guess I had a tendency. And I ended up at a friend's place in real China, Montana. The friend in question had been one of Kanzi's Chinese-speaking students. And it turned out that a couple of other people from that Chinese temple had showed up at the farm. There was a 1,000-acre farm with a lot of cabins on the hill. So I lived in a cabin for the whole summer, chopping wood, carrying water. It was very healthy. And we held a seminar, and each one of us gave a talk. There was an astrology talk where Dewey was his name, who was a member of the Max Heindel Rosy Cross group. He gave a lecture where he got everybody's astrological natal chart and proceeded to make a group chart based on everybody's positions. And that was his lecture. Somebody else did a lecture on the Amida Butsu movement in Japan. The owner of the farm analyzed a Chinese poem, a famous poem of a certain specific genre that was touted as a exemplar of that genre. And it turned out it broke half of the rules for that genre, but it was such a beautiful poem that it became an exemplar anyway. So that lasted the summer, and it was good to see the people again. Then I came back to Olympia again and went down to Philosophical Research Institute, had another go at that. It was 1975 when I left the Melchizedek Order. That was the year the peace accord for the Vietnam War was finally signed. And, the hippie movement had joined with the yuppie movement, in order to get political about civil rights and the Vietnam War. But it dragged on, and Nixon was elected, and Nixon was for the war and started the bombing in Cambodia as a secret action, and it went on and on. But in 75, the war was finally over. I was, of course, given a draft card and came up for renewal. As I said, I wrote crazy stuff all over the draft application, and they didn't bother me after that. I was obviously totally unsuited to be a soldier, which was clearly the case. And I think they called me in, but I managed to convince them I was not soldier material. So I was able to continue my spiritual quest without the difficulty of being in the military. Okay, that was 75 that I left the Melchizedek Order and went to Real China, Montana, came back, and basically I spent my time hitchhiking up and down the coast. There were certain places I would stop. One place that I stopped in was Bandon, Oregon, which is a small town on the coast. And there were three of us. The lead guy had done all the jobs in carpentry, but had never built a building. The middle guy was a sheetrock person, but he had never framed a building, and I barely knew one end of a hammer from the other. But the three of us got the blueprints, underbid all the professionals, and proceeded to spend the summer building a 60-unit apartment house for seniors. And it went very well. So I ended up with some money, and I went to Tassajara Zen Mountain Center for the summer. They had a deal. It was a resort with hot springs and cabins and that sort of thing. And during the winter, it was difficult Zen practice. During the summer, they opened it up to tourists, and they needed extra people to work the kitchen and clean the cabins and keep the tourists in good shape. And that was for $4 a day, working 4 days on and 1 day off when we could use the hot springs and use the trails. So it was an excellent summer. Again, the Zen style did suit me in some ways. I'm trying to remember what actually I did after that. A couple more runs up and down the coast, stopping in LA, going to the Philosophical Research Center, living with my friends in Rainy Alley. We were all drunks. And I was just about at the end of my drunken career. It had gotten bad over the last couple of years. In 81, I went to Mexico. I had been camping on the slopes of Mount Shasta, or rather across the meadow from Mount Shasta. And one day I walked into town to the bookstore, which was called the Golden Bough, and bought a book called The 10 Keys of Enoch. And in this book was a map of North America, and it talked about the descent of the dove in 1987, which was when the harmonic convergence was. And I saw that map, and there was the wings of the dove on the coasts of North America. The head of the dove was in Yucatan. the eye of the dove was in Palenque, and they said this cosmic dove was going to descend at the time of the cosmic harmonic convergence. So I looked at that map, and I thought, I wonder if that's true. And then I produced the thought, why don't I find out for myself? So that started my trip to Mexico. I wrote to a friend in Austin who was involved with the hieroglyphic decipherment project. They can now read like 90% of the Mayan inscriptions, which is astounding. It took years to put that together. Anyway, I wrote to her and said, I'm taking a trip to Maya land. Can you help me out? And she wrote back and said, come on. So I was working tubing trees in a burnt-out forest area. They had planted seedlings, and the deer were eating these seedlings, 2-year-old, I think it was ponderosa pine, straight grain, easy to harvest. And the deer were eating those trees, so they wanted to put a stop to that, and we had plastic tubes that we put over the trees, twist tie them to a stake. The stake was oriented southwest where the heat of the sun was coming. And we had acres and acres of these things to do, camped in the woods. It was a really good experience. And meanwhile, I had chalked up some money, and I received a legacy from my time in Palo Alto when I was a medical attendant. So I put all that together, went to Austin. There was a whole group of cavers and glyphers, spelunkers and hieroglyph people that were in that circle, and they all gave me a hint. There's a lake on the Guatemalan border that has an island in it. Get an inner tube and float out to the island, and there are ruins. I obviously got more hints than I had any right to have. And as a first-time visitor to the jungle, I got in way deeper than I had any right to do because I followed some of these cues. So I went to a hieroglyphic seminar in grad school and understood maybe 5% of what was being said, but it oriented me. My crowning achievement was finding a stone in a building in Palenque that had been reconstructed upside down. And I could tell the glyph was upside down, but I couldn't read the glyph. Anyway, it was a very good experience. Had lots of adventures down in Maya land. And when I came back, I went back to L.A. I have a friend that was a Gnostic bishop, and I had been staying with him off and on my journey. But he was not available that time, so I went back to Rainier Alley, where people were all drinking the Green Death, which was a name for Rainier Ale, very strong. And that went on for a while, and then it didn't work, so I left town, ended up in Seattle. Then I had an opportunity to go to Evergreen to finish my degrees, since I had left the college forever when Kanzi got deported. And I took visual anthropology and some computer science, some media studies, and Native American studies, and got my BA and BS. So I finally got my degrees. I almost went to grad school. I wanted to go to Simon Fraser and do cognitive science, but I thought better of it and then continued on my spiritual quest. By then I had met Jamyang and joined the Nalanda Institute, which is connected with the Sakya order. So I was back to Buddhism after that stint in Christianity and Western esoterics, which experience I value greatly. But Buddha Dharma made more sense to me. And it wasn't too long after I joined that the head of the Sakya order, Sakya Treason, came to Olympia, had a weekend retreat at the organic farm at Evergreen, And I got caught up in the retinue and proceeded to Seattle. Sakya Zen offered refuge. There were 5 of us taking refuge. I got the name Kunga Hlundrup, which means universal joy of spontaneity, something that I still aspire to manifest. So I was back in the Buddhist fold, and I'm content in the Buddhist fold, even though I have quite a bit of respect for Western esoterics and for esoteric Christianity. That completes the cycle, so I think I'll stop at this point and do some more later.